Hey guys, so one of the things that's been an ongoing topic of conversation, really with every business owner that I work with for going back for many years, is trying to kind of think about the responsibility whenever you start something or you run something, the responsibility for creating not just hard results like profit, but maybe some of the soft results that are inextricably bound up in the ability to create the financial results. And what I'm talking about, maybe more specifically, is the kind of like the very mysterious and difficult way that culture gets created inside of an organization. There is this interesting mix of the industry that you're in, the people who you associate with, the look and feel of the space that you occupy, all these different kinds of characteristics that come together to create this sort of like feel that accompanies the concrete stuff like the mission statement, the way that your logo looks and things like that. And that cultural thing, long before we got into this pandemic period that we're living in, was this mysterious topic of conversation that I would have with other business leaders, people would talk about like, boy, I love the culture that we created, but it's like a mystery to me for how, as to how it happened. Or I'm frustrated right now with kind of like the way it feels in my office, and I don't totally know how we got here, and I'm not 100% sure how to fix it. So what I wanted to do today was to take an opportunity to talk about some of that mystery, the kind of the mystery of culture just a little bit, particularly because it's gotten a new kind of like sense of importance, because not only do we have the perpetual challenges of creating healthy and productive culture, but we've got kind of the new challenge of trying to do it in a really complicated virtual way because of the pandemic. So to help unravel these issues a little bit, I've got two good buddies of mine who are going to join the conversation. Tim Carroll from Working Spaces and Dave Giffin from Experience on Demand. Tim is a guy who's worked on the physical space part of culture. Dave's a guy that's worked on the relationship side of culture. So Tim and Dave, thank you guys so much for being here for the conversation today.
You're quite welcome.
And so Tim, why don't I let you introduce yourself real quick, and you can tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is and what your business is.
Absolutely. So Tim Carroll, I'm the general manager of Working Spaces, where we create and inspire organizational culture and employee engagement through the use of architecture, furniture, and technology. So we really do believe that we're storytellers, and we can help tell a company's story through their physical space, and we match the culture of the company with the space. As it relates to this topic, I have an interesting side of my education background where I got a master's degree in communication and leadership, where my master's thesis was in building and maintaining culture in a virtual world. And so I never knew going into it that it would be so relevant today, but it is a happy accident for sure.
Very nice. Well, that'll be super fun to talk about. And Dave, tell us a little about your background and your experience.
Certainly. The preponderance of my background has been in human resource management, ranging from the Monsanto beginning to my last organization that I was VP of HR with was Stereotaxis, which is a medical device startup company. Since my departure from Stereotaxis, I've been a consultant, both internally with Friendship Village, where I'm also on the board. But the last couple of years, I've been working with a company called Experience on Demand, which is really the approaches that we feel small to medium-sized companies deserve to have the same quality of consulting that large companies have, but most smaller and medium-sized companies can't afford. So I work with either the VP of HR or the general managers in Tim's case, where I approach a number of different issues, from compensation to evaluating culture and how to improve culture. It's been a real interesting approach to provide that kind of service, because I've worked for larger companies, and the ability to provide that to small, medium-sized companies is very rewarding and quite enjoyable.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Okay, great. Well, so yeah, so it'll be fun to kind of have your guys' kind of like expertise kind of on two different, ends of the spectrum. I guess it's not really
Mhm.
a spectrum, but two different important components of culture. So to start with, I'd be curious just to hear from you guys. So I mean, culture, I think we all have a sense of what it is, but how would you maybe kind of like define culture? What are the ingredients? What is it exactly?
Yeah. Let me take that one first, and let me give you a couple of definitions that I think are important, because too often we don't understand, no different than when people talk about mission and vision, about, well, what does that really mean? But in this case, it's a culture is really somewhat of a mystery to a lot of people, but yet it exists in every organization. So I'm going to just read you a definition that I think is very good, and one that's really more from a textbook perspective, and that's: corporate culture refers to the beliefs and behaviors that determine how a company's employees and management interact and handle outside business transactions. Often, culture is implied, not necessarily defined, and it develops more organically over time, as opposed to purposely creating that culture. But it's culture exists whether you know it or not. Whether you have purposely created it, there is a culture in every organization.
I agree with that completely. Every word of that. I think organizations can guide, can lead, can maybe set a course for culture, but the vast majority of the culture is going to be built and sowed by the employees. And so you want to create a space where the kind of culture that you want can grow, but the employees, it's an agreed upon set of behaviors by the employees of the organization. And so it's important to keep the pulse on where that is. I think some of the people that say it's gotten to where I wasn't expecting it to go, and I don't know how to change it, I think maybe there wasn't a case where they had a pulse of where that culture was, as it slowly crept to where they didn't want it to go. But I think companies can set a course, but it's going to be really the employees that define it.
Yeah, in the end, you're absolutely right, Tim. And a culture is supposed to be a reflection of the company's values. And there are those that would argue that values and culture are the same thing. I wouldn't agree with that. I really think culture, or the values, are what you start with, and then the culture is what you end with. The question is whether the leadership of an organization is purposeful about articulating what those values are, to then ensure that in fact they're lived out on a day in and day out basis. Another definition that I have of culture is one that actually was an article I wrote for Experience on Demand. And again, I'd like to just quote it. This was an article about high performance culture. This is my definition, by the way, not a textbook definition that a professor might have taught us in school. But culture is the personality of a company. It touches everything. The culture of any company is simply the established pattern of doing things. Culture includes the shared beliefs, norms, and values within an organization. It's what determines the attitude and the behavior of any employee in any given situation. No matter how good your strategy is, when it comes down to it, how your people go about the execution of their responsibilities every day makes the difference. I think it was Peter Drucker, by the way, that was credited with the saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no matter how good of an articulated strategy you have, if you don't have a culture that matches that strategy and those values that are important to be able to carry out that strategy, you're doomed to not be successful.
I love that. So culture is the personality of the organization. I love that analogy. And it's interesting to think about that too, because kind of to revisit an earlier comment. So, a human being has a personality, whether you decided at a young age that you were going to set out to be an INFJ or whatever. Like, you develop that personality whether you intend to or not. And then likewise, just like it is funny to think about it in those terms, because I mean, all of us, I'm sure, have done, personality assessments, personality profiles. It's definitely kind of like a popular thing to at least kind of get a little bit of a sense of some of the peculiarities of your own personality. But how many organizations have any kind of an awareness of kind of like those same kinds of characteristics for the organization itself, Mm-hmm. So you've already kind of talked about some of the things that I was interested in, kind of like the issues have kind of come to the surface. So one of the comments Tim made is that, it's everyone in the organization that kind of like is ultimately responsible for creating the culture and owning the culture. And one of the things that you guys kind of implied too is there's a kind of like an inward looking aspect to culture, and there's the outward looking aspect to culture. So most of the folks that are going to be part of our audience are going to have some sort of a decision-making capacity in the organization that they're in. So if you think about the cultural responsibilities of a leader, what part of a just somebody who's in general leadership in a business, what part of your responsibilities relate to the creation or the promotion or the defense of a healthy culture in the organization?
Well, I'll jump in. So I believe that exactly what Dave was saying is that we have to focus on the values. And I think that as leaders, we have to really be kind of the bumpers to make sure that the ball doesn't go in the gutter, and just create spaces where culture can actually grow. And I don't mean that physically, although I do mean that physically, but also just create places that your employees can get together and that they can interact and that they can actually build that culture. It's funny, during this whole COVID time when we've all been virtual, or some have been virtual, and definitely we were during lockdown. I think some of the things that we've really realized during this time is those moments when we thought we were being the least productive. We were sitting there and shooting the breeze with other employees, have really become the moments where we realized that the seeds of culture were being sowed there, and the culture was growing there. Those were the moments when a company is really becoming who they are and creating that personality. And it's not the moments we thought. And so I think as leaders, we need to create those times and those spaces as much as we possibly can.
Interesting, Tim. I'll come at this from a leadership perspective, from a little bit different perspective, but I think the informality of what you're talking about is so critical, because when you look at the Gallup did a extensive survey of employee engagement questionnaires. And if you've ever taken an employee engagement survey, you know that they can go on for 50, 60, 75 questions. But what they identified were 12 questions that got to the root of, do you have a highly engaged employee or not? And if you have a highly engaged employee, I'm going a little bit off target here, but I think it's critically important to follow up what Tim said. But if you have a highly engaged employee, you have an effective culture. I think you can safely say that. And what most effectively indicated whether you have a highly engaged employer or not, and workforce, were these questions. I know what's expected of me at work. I have the materials and equipment I need. These are all assumptions everybody makes, but yet oftentimes they're not being satisfied. Right. And I think that gets back to the physical aspect that you're talking about, Tim, as well. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. I've been recognized in the last 7 days, or praised for work that I've been doing. My supervisor seems to care about me as a person. There's someone who at work who encourages my development. at work, my opinion seems to count. I feel like I'm in alignment with the mission of the company. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. And here's where I wanted to get to most importantly. I have a best friend at work. People are relationship driven. And if you don't have that opportunity, and if this gets us to what Josh began to refer to a little bit, and that is this whole COVID implication, and how do you have a relationship with your supervisor? How do you have a relationship with your fellow employees if you're not with them? And I think that's going to be an important issue that companies are going to have to face for the next couple of years.
And that just may head in a different direction to where you were going, Josh. But I think that also a relationship there with a supervisor is important. But then you have the issue of how about onboarding a brand new employee? Mm-hmm. And then we start talking about mentoring, where younger employees learn from the older employees on how to act, what to do on a daily basis. That's where a lot of the learning comes in your job when you're watching more established employees. And that's culture, that's building culture, and it's being lost because you don't get that over Zoom. You just, it's one of those pieces that long term, it's gonna play itself out, and it's really gonna shine a light on what people aren't really thinking about right now in relative to work from home.
So I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm kind of like dialing into with a lot of what you guys are saying, it's this kind of, so number one, it's this idea of like the cultivational aspect of culture. I mean, those two words have the same root on purpose, and that culture is something that has to be kind of like, so we've already talked about seeds being planted, nurturing, feeding, then there's this like husbandry sort of idea about how to get the culture to grow the way that you want it to. But there's also kind of like right alongside that, this idea that you can't create culture in like a command and control sort of a way. It cannot be aggressively engineered. It's something. It's organic. Again, going back to the kind of the cultivational idea, it's something that grows. And so if you kind of like try to extend that metaphor a little bit, you have to have, if you want it to grow, you have to be, so I think there's a certain degree in which you have to be aware of the environment, So if you're like, here's what we're going to do, guys, we're going to grow orange trees, but you are located in, Saskatchewan, you're going to have an issue. You're going to be frustrated, So there's a little bit of like an awareness of the environment that kind of comes into play. But then there's this idea that you guys have kind of, alluded to several times, that you want to try to kind of like gently encourage and direct the culture to grow in a particular direction. But just like if you put the seed in the ground and stuck your hand in the dirt and tried to pull a tree out, you're going to be disappointed, So that being said, well, and I'll just talk from experience too. So I know that for me, I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone through training or a class on like the difference between, like a cop versus a coach, or how, mentoring or coaching is not about me talking with someone and then telling them, oh, okay, I understand exactly what you need to do. So tomorrow morning you get up, you do this, you do that, you do the other. It's encouraging that idea. You're encouraging someone to be able to have the skill set to make informed decisions about what to do based on what their heart and their mind are telling them, not based on what they remembered I told them, And it seems like that idea, that approach to coaching and mentoring relates a lot to what you guys are saying about how to kind of like engender and encourage the culture that you want to develop on its own. So that being said, I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this virtual world that we're in. And we were talking earlier before we started the video about a lot of expert opinions that we might be in a scenario where we have to deal with this for maybe a few years, realistically. And so we could talk a lot about why that sucks. And I'm sure we all will, you can't help it. But if it's going to be the practical reality, what do we do? How do we do this kind of like this cultivational work given the limitations that we have with virtual work and work from home and those sorts of things.
Well, if I can jump in, I would say, first of all, there's assumptions that we're going to always be working from home. And look, my company, we've been back since May 4th. There are ways to create spaces where you can be very deliberate and intentional about taking care of your employees in your office. And we do that on a daily basis. We're helping companies come back in their safe return to work every week, all the time. And we're counseling them on that and helping them get products in place that can actually help mitigate any risks. So I would say people are going to be coming back more and more. We're seeing it, people coming back more and more and more and more. And so the work from home thing, it's tough. It's not impossible to create and maintain that culture. I'll just, again, I'll save you a lot of time and boredom reading my thesis and tell you that it's possible, and but it's exhausting, and you put a lot of burden on your leaders to make sure they're helping to create that and maintain that and keep it going. So it's a tough thing to do, and you need to have an agreed upon shorthand for your organization, and it needs to be really small enough to where it can survive. Remember, a lot of these companies that are saying it works right now, they have employees that have had years and years and years of experience within that culture. So translating it to virtual is not that difficult. But again, the minute they bring somebody on, it's going to start to shine a light on a problem of building a culture in a virtual world. So I will tell you, a lot of companies have tried it way before COVID. IBM, Pitney Bowes years ago when I worked for them, and Yahoo have all tried this work from home, among many others. And they came back because they couldn't innovate, they couldn't collaborate, they couldn't build culture. Marissa Mayer was very famous for bringing everybody back from Yahoo, and she got vilified for it. But she was right, because she realized, I can't take over a company and then try to build a new culture and everybody sitting at their home without their pants on. So put your pants on, come on back to work, and let's try to get to where this company needs to go. And so anyway, I think that people can come back. We will have them back. There is a hybrid that I think is going to start happening, where people work some from home, some from the office. The office is going to become the collaborative and social hub. And there's ways to do that on a hybrid basis, but on a full-time, it's really, really difficult.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Tim, and perhaps it's just because I'm an old school guy that completely grew up in the non-Zoom culture, and the interactions of people cannot be replaced through a Zoom call. They just can't. And particularly the larger the group, but even in a one-on-one conversation, you know, there are some characteristics of what I would call an effective culture. And yeah, we've talked already about making sure everybody understands the mission and vision, and making sure you're aligned with your values, et cetera, and leadership from the top. But the other most important aspects of an effective culture, the characteristics of them, are open and candid communications. Well, I'm sorry, but it's difficult to read a person's face, to know how they're reacting, to see the nonverbal cues that they give off. But if you put this in the context of how am I going to do it in the Zoom era for the next few years, that means you have to work that much harder at communicating. It means that you can't have your business calls be nothing but a business call. It means you've got to be able to recognize and reward contributions of employees. It means you have to find some way to build relationships. And even if that means calls where you talk about what's going on in your life, what are the challenges. You know, if I was in the middle of running a company, I'd want to have multiple small groups of of employees and say, well, tell me what's going on. What are the challenges you've got going? You've got 3 kids. Tell me, how do you do that? Because the more you know about people, the more you're able to relate to them. Again, from the communication standpoint, setting expectations. It's one thing to be able to walk up to or walk in somebody's office and say, hey, by the way, here's what I want to make sure we do. But if you don't set expectations, people are going to fill in the blank and they're going to do whatever they think is important. And then promoting the collaboration, that sense of team environment, you're going to have to be far more purposeful about it now. How you do that long term and be successful when this whole thing is behind us is it's a heck of a challenge that I don't know how you accomplish all this without more face-to-face interactions with your employees. As Josh talked about in the very beginning, Tim was going to approach it from the physical standpoint and Dave from the relationship standpoint. And there is no substitute for relationships.
You know, and I'll tell you, we've been, since day one back in March, we've been doing small group happy hours. We've done some full company happy hours, and that's just a cluster. But we've done, you know, a lot of it. We've got another one today. We've continued them throughout, and they've been beneficial, especially when we couldn't be together. But it is no match for the happy hours we have together as a company when we're physically together in each office or together just completely. And they've been nice. Don't get me wrong. And I still like them, and we're going to continue to do them. But it's that being together physically it's just tough to replace it, as Dave said. And those quick conversations, he mentioned that was another thing that all these companies said were the reasons why it didn't work, is because they couldn't have that quick conversation. It may take you, you know, forever to set up a meeting with someone and then have that. They were saying that it was taking them 3 and 4 and 5 Zoom meetings to finish off a project that it could have taken 10, 15 minutes if we were face to face, because the communication was being lost. And quite frankly, when you're having to say, hey, Barry, you're on mute 100 times, you know, it becomes a little distracting to the conversation. So it's tough. Again, I'm not here to say because I sell, you know, space and culture and matching culture with space, that it's the only way to go. There are ways that it can work. I have a brother that has, there's only 3 people in the company. They've been together since, you know, Moby Dick was a minnow, and they now can, you know, finish each other's sentences. They've gotten rid of their office. They do heads down work. There's not a lot of collaboration. They present the work to the client. That's a perfect example of how this could work. So it can work, but I think for those that are really trying to build and maintain culture, it's going to be a tough sled virtually.
You know, we're not letting Josh ask any questions, Tim, but that's okay.
This is true.
But if you think about, you made a great point earlier, and that is when you bring a new person in, how do you integrate them into perhaps a culture? If a company of 3, that's not a problem as long as the 3 guys are still together. But it might be worth our while to spend just a minute thinking from the perspective of how do you go about sustaining your culture, because you are going to have new employees, and you know, the hiring process, people don't think of it too often. They think of it as one-way street, but really you're establishing a relationship with the employee during the interviewing process, during every aspect of that process, and making sure that you are hiring the people that have the values you have, that will sustain the culture you want, that you have and want to continue, is so critical. And then how you train them to make sure that they not only understand what the values are, but what are the behaviors that reflect those values. because it's hard sometimes for employees to say, well, okay, yeah, I understand you value integrity, but what does that really mean when it comes to my behavior and making that come alive, and why it's so important? Too many companies fail to either drive a culture or drive change because they don't tell people why it's important. And usually people would come on board. But then the other aspect of Zoom is, how do you model this as a leader? And I don't mean just leaders that are high up in the organization. There are leaders in your organization, whether you think there are or not, and they may not have a fancy title or a supervisor title or VP title, but there are leaders in that organization that you want to make sure are modeling exactly the kind of culture that you want. And then you have to continue to reinforce that. And how you go about all that through Zoom, and I guess I'm giving a plug for Zoom, but everybody seems to be using it. But you just have to be that much more purposeful about it.
You know, and again, Josh, sorry, but just to comment on, we brought an employee on that started April 1st. We were in the midst of a lockdown, and we wanted to honor that because we'd already hired him. And so we onboarded him exclusively over Zoom.
Wow.
100%. And I think he would be the first to say it worked. Wouldn't want to do it again. And on May 4th, when we came back to the office, I mean, I left early because I was ready to get back. He beat me to the office. He was on fire to get into the physical space and start to learn about everything that everything he'd been learning about for the past month. And so in order to do that, we had to set him up with every job function in the company and let him sit there on Zoom watching them do their job, when normally he would be side by side with them, talking to them, whatever. And so we tried as much as we possibly could to make it as normal as we possibly could. And we filled his day and we did everything. But, you know, I'm sure it was exhausting for him because there is something called Zoom fatigue. And by the end of the day, you feel like you've run a marathon, even more so than if you're in the physical space after you've been on Zoom all day. But so it can be done, but it's tough. And I don't think he got a good sense of everybody telling him what our culture was, everybody telling him what our values are. But there's no way he got to see it in practice. No way.
Yeah, it's that felt aspect of culture, and you know, like, and we aren't brains in a jar. You know what I mean? Like, we have physical bodies, you know, and I mean, that's, you know, part of being human is like experiencing all of, you know, that aspect of stuff. It's not just, you know, brains interfacing, you know, and that's part of the reason why this is like a disorienting artificial time, you know, and so it's interesting. It's kind of a unique challenge of trying to think about how to like protect and defend and promote your culture given all these, you know, weird circumstances. But it's an opportunity to do just what we're doing and to kind of think critically about what the culture is in the first place and what we want that feel to look like. And kind of related to that, one of the things that I'm curious about is what to do when you identify a cultural problem, you know? So some of maybe the less pleasant parts of leadership, you know, whenever it's your job to kind of, you know, have the tough conversation or whatever. So, and I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about both in terms of like the present circumstances with the, you know, the weird pandemic environment, but then also just generally speaking. So how do you, as kind of like a keeper of the culture, and to Dave's point too, this is for the CEO. This is also for everyone in the organization who cares about having a place to work that feels good to you, and kind of like promoting those cultures just out of self-interest, because you don't want work to get to head in a direction that you're not comfortable with, you know. So what do you do? So, well, I guess maybe to start with, how do you identify a cultural problem? How can you tell if it's a cultural problem? And then if you do identify them, what do you do about
it? You know, that's something that Experience on Demand does quite frequently. And in fact, I had a great experience with a local company that turned out to be such a rewarding opportunity for me and resulted in significant improvement for the company, just phenomenal. And where we worked there with them, we started out with, so articulate for us what's important to you. What are the values? What are the behaviors that represent, as we talked about before, those values? How do they look? What are the guiding principles? And we had them, and we set aside what was today and simply said, what is it that you want? Because I keep using the word purposeful, but if you aren't purposeful, you're wasting your time. Then what we did was we conducted a cultural assessment survey. We took those values, we took those guiding principles and those behaviors, and we asked people anonymously online, how's the company doing? And it was rather revealing, because what they found was that they weren't doing a very good job of creating a culture that reflected what was important to them. That from there, we had them sit down and share those results specifically with everybody in smaller groups, because large group meetings on that kind of a situation, it's just not very effective. In this cases, fortunately, it was in person, so you didn't have to worry about managing a Zoom call with a number of people. And then we asked them, the employees, so what can we do to, in fact, make this come alive? And in this company's case, these employees it was an employee-owned company. So there's an incredible incentive there. So, and that's maybe some of it unique, because you don't always have an ESOP type of company. But we then identified action plans that said, what are we going to do to take a different direction to create the kind of culture that we want? And as I said, the results were incredible. And the employees owned it.
You know, I love that. You know, we've had people in our organization that have said, you know, we've just lost this, because right now we're doing a kind of a hybrid to help the families out that have kids and who needed to also be part-time teachers. So we have a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, where they are at home. So, I mean, hopefully kids will be going back to school soon. But we're doing that. And so there is a little bit of disconnection when you have that. And so we have had employees that are saying, hey, look, we want more connection. We're not together as often as we used to be. And so our general response is, be the change you want to see in the world. If you want that, if we truly believe that the employees are the bearers of the culture, then it needs to be on them. We're going to create happy hours and do whatever, you know, the things that we do. We'll do a trunk or treat this weekend, or on Friday with our employees and their kids, and we'll do all that stuff. But once we started saying that to the employees, they started setting up their own time together outside of the company, their own lunches. They would set up to go, and when it was a little warmer, and picnic outside. And so they've started to take it on themselves, and we're hearing a lot less and less and less that the connection is lost, because they're taking it upon themselves to connect with each other. And again, we've just created the environment for it, and they've gone out there and done it. And I think that's a big thing.
You know, I have to commend Tim, if I could, Josh. I realize he's got a master's in this area, but I would tell you that he's a wonderful example about how the leader of an organization is purposefully creating a culture. And I just commend you, Tim, for that effort.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's, it just makes me think too. I mean, it's that idea too that kind of gets us back to the beginning of the conversation about who it is that owns the culture in the first place. So the leader can encourage the culture to grow in a certain direction, but ultimately, whether it does or not will be dependent upon everybody in the organization. And so even in the way that you address cultural problems, it's kind of like pushing that responsibility down to the people who ultimately have the ability to affect change in the first place, and also having the faith that that's the right thing to do. I think that's one of the hard things is, I think for so many of us, when you kind of like default to that command and control style, it's because you're afraid that you can't get the results any other way, and so it's having the faith that, no, I mean, I've got a good team. My team will take care of this if I just let them. If I set them up for success, then things will work out the way that I want them to.
You're absolutely right. The one thing I would mention that is critically important, and I think I referred to it earlier, but that is sometimes you have to pull weeds. If you have an environment where you have people that are not happy, who are not living out that culture the way you want them to, who are really undermining the values and exhibiting behaviors that are contrary to what those values are all about, you've got to address that, because it becomes a cancer if you don't. And too often people tolerate that kind of circumstances, and as a result, that cancer continues to grow. And we all know what happens with cancer. So again, you address it early on, and you continue to provide feedback. But at some point in time, the culture and the company has to outweigh your devotion to trying to hang on to somebody when they're not living the kind of culture that you want.
John Maxwell would call it blessed separation, or blessed subtraction is what he would call it. We call it promoting the customer.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's some of the unpleasantness that goes along, but weeding, I think, is a great example. And guys, great thoughts. I appreciate you being up for the conversation so much. It's a great conversation that I feel like I'd be interested in having more of. Couple takeaways for me. So I feel like we, laced throughout the conversation were all these metaphors about cultivation, and that's a really helpful way for me just to kind of conceive of this whole topic. I want to be that farmer that's encouraging healthy growth, and another thing too is that idea that culture is the personality of the organization. I think that's a great way to think about it. It helps give me even a little bit of direction for what it is that I'm trying to pull off when I'm trying to think about building a culture, So again, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your insights. Lots of good thoughts. Guys, if you have anything specific that you'd be interested in following up with Tim or Dave on, I would encourage you to do that. Any parting thoughts, Tim or Dave?
I would tell you that this is probably the most important part of building a great company, and for us, matching that culture with space. There is no better way to affect change in culture than changing the space, the physical space that the people work in, and it shows a lot to them that you care, and it creates the kind of work that you want out of them. So this is an important topic for sure.
And my only closing comment would be to come back to what Peter Drucker told us quite a few years ago. It was pretty smart when it came to running a business, and that is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the greatest strategy that anyone could ever create, but if you don't have a culture to be in alignment with, you will run the risk of failure. And I encourage people to take stock in their culture, to be aware of it, and be purposeful about creating it.
I think that's a great thought. And, and I'm sure you guys have had this experience, but I've talked with folks before who are like, I know we've got, the right product. We've got, the room in the market. I know we're spending the money on marketing. We've got salespeople. We're getting meetings. Like how come we can't get the results that we want? So when it's a big mystery, I feel like oftentimes the problem is a cultural problem. For exactly what the reasons that Dave's talking about. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of end the conversation is just kind of focusing on why this is something we should care about in the first place. So thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. And let us know if you guys have any questions, and thanks for your time.